The clock above the nurse's station clicked from 6:59 to 7:00 a.m. in a soft, steady way that did not match the mess of cables and monitors below it. Summit Ridge Medical Center was waking up. Someone burned a pot of coffee. A TV in the waiting room played a muted morning show. The smell of disinfectant clung to everything sharp and artificial like it was trying too hard. Riley West signed her name on the shift log with neat block letters, then slipped the pen back into its holder. Her scrubs were a shade darker than everyone else's, a little faded at the seams. Beneath the V of the neckline, a thin silver chain disappeared against her skin. There was a small weight on that chain resting against her collarbone, and her fingers brushed it once without thinking. "Morning, Riley," Joe Carter called from the medication cart. Joe was in her mid-40s, short hair, tucked under a scrub cap with sunflowers on it. Her badge read, "Charge Nurse" in bold blue. "Morning," Riley answered. She did not reach for coffee. She moved instead to the respiratory bay, where ventilators, portable oxygen tanks, and a row of nebulizers waited like quiet machines in a garage. She started at one end and worked her way down, checking alarms hoses' battery levels. She lifted each tank just enough to feel the weight. She read the tiny gauges that everyone else tended to glance at. At the station, a new hire with glitter on her nails leaned toward Joe. "She always liked that," the younger nurse whispered, eyes following Riley. Joe shrugged. "Ever since she transferred in, 6 months never late. She looks like she lives in a library. She moves like she lives somewhere else," Joe said. "You should see her when a trauma comes in. It's like she knows the script before we even get the call." The younger nurse laughed it off, but her gaze stayed on Riley. Riley finished her checks and made a small note on a yellow sticky that she folded over and stuck to the side of one vent. It was not about a failure, only a battery that would need changing before night shift. She liked things that did not surprise her. A trauma pager chirped in someone's pocket, then went quiet again. False alarm. The ER hummed with the low buzz of an ordinary weekday morning. Blood draws paperwork, a child with a sprained wrist, a middle-aged man complaining of chest tightness that turned out to be heartburn. Riley kept moving. She reset a pump for one nurse, adjusted the angle of a bed for another. Her hands were quick and precise, as if she were always half a beat ahead of the room. "Riley, can you take a look at Bay 4, Joe called. "The SAT monitor keeps dropping, but the kid looks fine." Riley stepped into Bay 4, watched the monitor for 3 long breaths, then followed the cable with her hand. The sensor had been clipped to a cold finger. She warmed the boy's hand between her palms for a moment, then clipped it to his ear. "Sensors do not like cold," she told him lightly. "You planning to keep all your blood to yourself today?" The boy giggled. The waveform smoothed out. Riley adjusted the chart on the end of the bed and slipped back into the hallway. She was on her way to the supply room when she heard it. A faint hiss almost lost under the squeak of wheels and the beeping of monitors. It was not the constant release of oxygen through a nasal cannula. It was sharper, intermittent, like something breathing that did not want to be heard. She stopped walking. The hallway was empty except for an old gurney pushed against the wall and a cart with folded linens. The hiss came again, thin and dry, somewhere behind the double doors at the end. Riley glanced at the clock. 11:43. Technically the start of lunch. She pushed the doors open. On the other side was the service corridor that most staff ignored. Utility closets, a gray metal door, marked "mechanical access," the faint smell of dust and paint. The hiss was clearer here. It came from behind the mechanical door where the hospital's oxygen manifold and piping lived. Her hand found the badge on her pocket, then moved to the ring under her shirt again. Old reflex. She took a slow breath and keyed the access panel. Cool air rushed out, carrying the smell of metal and something dry and faintly sweet. The mechanical room was narrow, lined with copper pipes and gauges valves, labeled with numbers that very few nurses ever read. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead. The sound of the hiss was steady now. She followed it along the main branch until she found the feeder line that ran along the back wall. The gauge twitched just under the green. Technically safe. Enough to ignore. She did not ignore it. Her fingers traced the pipe, feeling for vibration. Halfway along near a joint, her palm grew colder. There was a hairline crack no wider than a pencil line, invisible unless the light hit it just right. When she leaned close, the hiss brushed her skin. She opened the small black pouch clipped inside her scrub top. The kit was minimalist and out of place here. A roll of tape, 2 compact syringes, a folded piece of foil, and a tiny tube of metallic putty with no hospital label. She knelt, cleaned the area as best she could, hands moving with a quiet confidence. She mixed the putty between her fingers until it warmed, then pressed it over the crack, smoothing the edges until the hiss grew weak, then stopped. Silence filled the room. The only sound left was the low hum of the lights. She straightened, wiped her fingers with a piece of gauze, then made a mental note of the valve number. On her way out, she dialed facilities from the wall phone. "This is ER. You have a small leak on oxygen feeder line, 3 mechanical room off the main corridor. I sealed it temporarily. You should schedule a full replacement." The man on the phone sounded puzzled. "Temporary seal with what?" "Industrial-grade patch compound for pressure lines," she said. "It will hold, but you should not let it live there." "Sure," he replied slowly. "I'll put in a work order." He probably would not. She knew how these things went. There were a lot of forms between problem and solution. By the time she returned to the ER, Joe was halfway through a sandwich at the nurse's station. "Where'd you vanish to?" Joe asked. "Mechanical corridor," Riley said. "There was a leak." Joe blinked. "You can hear that from here?" "If it did quiet enough," Riley answered. "Well, it is not quiet," Joe said, nodding toward triage. "They just bust in half a flu clinic." Riley nodded and went back to work. 2 hours later, a message appeared on her phone. Dr. Klein Wolker's office now. Dr. Harold Klein kept his office at the far end of the administrative wing. The hall leading to it was lined with framed certificates in heavy wood frames. Diplomas, awards, photos from conferences, everything polished, ordered safe. He did not look up when she knocked and stepped in. "Sit," he said, still reading a report. She sat. He let the silence stretch. It was an old tactic. It did not bother her. Silence was familiar. Finally, he lifted a sheet of paper and held it up. "Do you know what this is, Ms. West?" "My name is on it," she said, "the oxygen manifold report." "It is a documentation of unauthorized maintenance," Klein replied. His voice stayed smooth, but his fingers gripped the edge of the paper a little too tight. "You bypassed facilities. You entered a restricted area. You applied an unapproved material to critical equipment." "There was an active leak," Riley said. "Pressure was dropping. I reported it." "There are procedures for that," Klein said. "You call your supervisor. Your supervisor files a request. Facilities assesses. There is a chain for a reason." She watched him arrange the papers on his desk corner to corner. "If we followed that chain," she said, "we would still be waiting while oxygen leaked." "The gauge was within acceptable range," he snapped. "It says so right here. Within acceptable range means not an emergency. What you did was reckless." Her eyes dropped to his desk. There were 3 plaques lined up in front of him: Administrator of the Year, Hospital Leadership Excellence, a framed letter of appreciation from the board. "I did not treat it as an emergency," Riley answered. "I treated it as a problem with a solution in arm's reach." Klein stood up, then sat back down, as if he could not find a position that made him tall enough. "We are not in a war zone, Ms. West. We are a civilian hospital. We follow protocols. We do not improvise. We do not have cowboys." "I'm not a cowboy," she said quietly. He ignored that. "You have been here 6 months. In that time, you have been early efficient and very busy touching things that are not your concern." She held his gaze. "If something threatens ventilation in my department," she said, "it is my concern." His jaw tensed. For a heartbeat, his insecurity showed. Then it vanished behind his professional mask. "Your efficiency is becoming a liability," he said. "People who move too fast skip steps. People who skip steps create lawsuits." Riley thought of the crack in the pipe, the hiss that had stopped. She thought of the boy in Bay 4, the sensor now steady on his ear. "I did not skip steps," she said. "I added one." He tossed the report onto the desk. "Do not do it again," he said. "Next time you hear a hiss, you call someone whose job it is to listen." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." As she left his office, the hallway outside unfolded in glossy frames and straight lines. The air felt too still. No hiss, no hum, just the faint echo of a copy machine in another room. She walked back toward the ER. At the end of the hallway, a set of windows looked out over the parking lot, and beyond that, the faint blue strip of the Pacific. Somewhere above that water too high to see a helicopter droned. The sound was distant, a low, steady thrum that barely touched the glass. Riley paused, listening for a moment, fingers closing around the small ring under her shirt. Then she turned away from the window and stepped back into the white light of the emergency department, where the next vital sign was already flashing for her attention. The next time Riley saw the clock above the nurse's station, the hands were slicing towards 7 again. Another morning, different patients, same white light. She signed in, checked the assignment board, and tied her hair back a little tighter. Someone had written a smiley face beside her name on the staffing sheet. She stared at it a moment, then reached for the roll of tape and covered it with a strip of white. The night charge nurse handed over a report. A drunk tank case, a possible appendicitis, 2 chest pains that had turned out to be nothing deadly. The usual. "Anything you need to know about?" Riley asked. The night nurse thought about it and shook her head. "Pretty quiet. You might actually finish a cup of coffee for once." Riley did not answer. Quiet never lasted. She drifted into the rhythm without thinking. Blood draws, IV starts a wheelchair that needed fixing. She stepped around a janitor mopping up spilled apple juice. The smell of cleaning fluid layered over sickness coffee and something metallic that never left. At 7-Eleven, a child cried in triage, a thin, high sound that skated along the ceiling tiles. At 7:12, the trauma pager went off. The sound cut through the ER, a sharp, rising tone that pulled heads up and stalled conversations. Jo grabbed the device from the counter, squinted at the tiny screen, and felt the color drain from her face. Code black, she read. Her voice was flat now. Incoming military trauma, 10 minutes. 10 out, one of the residents said. We got time. Jo shook her heady eyes, narrowing. They are running sirens already. Move. The room changed temperature. The background hum of the ER sharpened into a focused scramble. Curtains snapped open. A trauma bay was cleared, bed-stripped monitors turned on and reset. Someone wheeled in the crash cart cords rattling against metal. A respiratory therapist rolled in a ventilator and checked the tubing with quick fingers. Riley stood at the foot of trauma, 2 hands on the rail, taking in what they had and what they did not. She checked the suction, the size of the endotracheal tubes, the airway blades. She set out a scalpel, a tracheostomy kit, and an extra pair of gloves. Expecting airway trouble? Jo asked, hovering at her shoulder. It is a helicopter transfer, Riley said. Altitude, vibration, blood. Things swell. Jo almost made a joke, then thought better of it. The monitor over the bed glowed with an empty green line waiting. Sirens bled into the distance. Faint at first, then louder, a rising wail that coiled around the building bounced off the concrete and glass. The automatic doors at the ambulance bay slid open before anyone touched them. The motion sensor catching the blur of movement. A paramedic in a dark navy flight suit burst in, first pushing the gurney. Another ran beside him, squeezing an oxygen bag. The man on the stretcher was large, heavy with muscle and gear, uniform shredded and stained dark. His skin had the waxy sheen of someone already halfway gone. Male, approximately 50, Major General Daniel Stroud, United States Marine Corps. The lead medic rattled off. Blast injury, lower abdomen. We lost his airway in flight. He coded twice. He is circling the drain. The bagging medic cursed under his breath as he tried to force air into lungs that did not want to open. Riley saw the bulge in the man's neck, the strained muscles above the collar. The resident on duty, a pale young man barely past his exams, fumbled for the laryngoscope. Let me intubate, he said. His voice cracked just enough to give him away. Riley stepped closer to the head of the bed, eyes flicking to the monitor. The heart rate skated low. The oxygen saturation was a plummeting number in red. The resident tried to open the general's mouth further. Blood and fluid pooled at the back of the throat. The vocal cords were nowhere to be seen. His hand trembled. I cannot get a view, he muttered. You have to, the paramedic snapped. He's about to crash. I know, the resident said. His voice grew thinner. I know, I just need a second. Riley looked at the man's neck again. The swelling at the level of the larynx, the purplish discoloration, the way his chest barely rose even with the bag. He did not have a second. Her hand moved before the thought finished forming. She reached for the scalpel she had already laid out. Her other hand stripped a sterile drape, exposing the throat. She found the notch of the thyroid cartilage with the edge of her thumb, then the softer dip just below. Step back, she said. The resident did not move. His eyes were fixed on the blade she was lifting. Hey, I am intubating, he protested. You cannot just cut his neck open. That is not protocol. He is occluded at the top, Riley said. Her voice was calm and more dangerous for it. You are feeding air into nowhere. You do not have authority for a crick, he said. You are a nurse. The monitor alarm changed pitch. The oxygen saturation number slipped into the low 60s. The general's lips turned a deeper blue. Jo's voice came from somewhere behind Riley. Do it, she said. Riley felt the cartilage under her fingers, the familiar landmarks she had found in sand and mud in the back of armored vehicles. The room blurred at the edges. The tight circle that mattered shrank to skin cartilage metal, and the seconds left. She made a small vertical incision through the skin, then a horizontal cut into the membrane. A quick push with the handle, a twist, a spreading of space. Blood welled, then air cold against her gloved knuckles. She slid the tracheostomy tube in, connected the bag, and nodded once. Ventilate. The respiratory therapist squeezed the bag. The first rush of air went in hard, then easier. The chest rose. The monitor beep changed flat jerk, becoming a rhythm again. The oxygen number climbed past 70, then 78, then 80. The resident stared at her. You just did a cricothyrotomy, he said, as if naming it would rewind the scene. On a 2-star general. I did an airway, Riley answered. The doors behind them slammed open again. A surgical team had arrived, led by Dr. Evelyn Park in a scrub cap with plain dark fabric and quiet eyes that missed nothing. Move him, Park ordered, already scanning the vitals. Or 3 now. Who secured the airway? I did, Riley said. Park's gaze flicked down to the neatly placed tube, the position of the incision, the angle of the cut. There was no time to comment. The team whisked the gurney out. The door to the trauma bay flapped once, twice, then settled. For a moment, the ER held its breath along with the general. Then everything began moving again. Riley stripped off her gloves. Her hands were steady, but there was a faint tremor in her shoulders that only someone very close would have seen. She threw the gloves into the red bin, peeled off the gown, and dropped it in after. A shadow blocked the doorway. Ms. West. Dr. Klein stood there in a white coat so pressed it barely bent when he moved. His tie was perfect. His jaw was not. He glanced at the bloody instruments, then at the empty bed, then at Riley. "My office," he said. "Now." Jo opened her mouth, eyes flashing. "Klein, she just saved." "My office," he repeated. "Now Nurse Carter." Jo bit the rest of her sentence back. Her look at Riley held apology and anger and fear all mixed up. Riley gave her the smallest shake of the head and followed Klein. The walk down the administrative hall felt longer this time. The frames on the walls seemed to lean in glass, catching the reflection of her blood-spattered shoes. Klein closed his office door with more force than necessary. The certificates on the nearby wall rattled against the drywall. "Explain yourself," he said. Riley stood in front of his desk. There was a smear of dried blood on her forearm where the gown had gapped. "Major General Stroud lost his airway," she said. "Standard intubation failed. I performed a cricothyrotomy to restore ventilation. He is en route to the operating room." "You performed an invasive surgical procedure reserved for physicians," Klein cut in. "Without authorization, without my knowledge, on a high-ranking officer." "There was no physician at the head who could see his cords," she said. "There was no time." "There is always time to follow protocol," Klein replied. His voice climbed. "You are a nurse. Your scope does not include cutting a hole in a general's throat. Do you understand the liability you have created?" Riley let her gaze rest on the edge of his desk. A drop of her own blood had fallen there from her forearm, a dark comma on his polished wood. "I understand he's not dead," she said. "Yeah, dead," she said. Klein pressed his palm down over the stain as if he could erase it through contact. "You have no idea what you have done," he hissed. "Military media legal. If he dies, this hospital is on every channel, and you have gifted every lawyer in the state a reason to tear us apart." "If I had not intervened, he would already be in the morgue," Riley said. Klein's face flushed red. He moved around the desk until he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and the faint chemical trace of his cologne. "You are finished here," he said quietly. The softness of his tone made the words hit harder. "Effective immediately. Turn in your badge and access card." There was a beat of silence. Riley did not argue. She slid the plastic badge from her scrub top, the clip catching for a moment on the fabric. She unhooked it and set it gently on his desk beside his nameplate. He picked it up as if it were contaminated and dropped it into the top drawer. "Security will escort you out of the building," Sarhi said. "You are not to return to the emergency department." Her throat felt dry, but her voice did not shake. "I have patients on the board," she said. "They are no longer your concern," Klein answered. "You are no longer employed here." His eyes were bright, almost feverish, like he had been waiting for this moment. It was not only about the procedure, it was about control, about a person in his department who refused to fit into his lines. Riley nodded once. "May I retrieve my personal items from the locker room?" she asked. "Or will someone mail them?" He waved a hand. 5 minutes, with escort." She turned toward the door. "And Ms. West, you see," and he added. She paused. "If anyone from the military comes sniffing around," he said, "they will be informed that you acted outside hospital policy, that you put this institution at risk. I will not have them thinking we encourage that behavior." She looked back at him just long enough for their eyes to meet. "Understood," she said. The security guard who walked her back to the ER did not say much. He was young cheeks still soft, badge shining on his belt. He kept a respectful distance as if he knew she was not dangerous, but could not quite shake the idea that he was supposed to be watching her. In the locker room, she opened the small metal door with her number on it. Inside were a pair of running shoes, a folded sweatshirt, a paperback book with a bent cover, and a small notebook with a worn leather cover. She took the notebook, last fingers lingering on it. From the other side of the wall, she could hear muffled voices. The ER kept moving. Someone laughed short and nervous. A cart rattled over the tile. She shut the locker, the metal clanging softly, and stepped back into the hall. As she walked past the nurses' station for what she assumed would be the last time, several heads turned. Some nurses looked away fast. Others held her gaze. Jo stared openly, lips pressed together, eyes wet. "What did he say?" Jo asked, almost under her breath. Riley adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "He fired me," she said. The words landed between them with a weight Riley could feel in her chest. Before Joe could respond, a voice called from the far end of the hall. "Dr. Park to OR3, the intercom crackled. "Dr. Park, OR3. Riley hesitated for half a second, listening to the ceiling speaker, then walked toward the exit. Outside, the morning light had sharpened. The air was cool, touched by the ocean. As the automatic door slid shut behind her, a low sound rolled over the city. For a moment, she thought it was traffic or a distant train, but as she stepped onto the concrete and looked up at the pale blue sky, she recognized the faint, rhythmic thrum. Rotors somewhere above the skyline moving closer. The sound grew stronger, turning the morning air into a low vibration that pressed against Riley's ribs. Out beyond the parking lot above the line of palms and the rectangle of the parking garage, a dark shape rose into view. A helicopter, gray and heavy, moved across the sky toward the hospital. The rotors chopped the light into flickers. A gust of wind pushed at her scrubs, carrying the smell of salt and aviation fuel. A security guard at the entrance stopped mid-sentence. His radio crackled at his shoulder. "Roof landing," a voice barked through the static. "Repeat, military bird on the roof. They are requesting direct access to the emergency department." The guard glanced at Riley, then looked away quickly, suddenly unsure what to do with the woman he had just escorted out. Inside, above the emergency department, the roof shook as the helicopter settled. Dust loosened from vents. The fluorescent lights in the hallway trembled. In OR3. Dr. Evelyn Park did not look up when the ceiling gave a faint rattle. She was elbow-deep in Major General Stroud's abdomen, hands working methodically to control the bleed that refused to behave. "Clamp," she said. Her assistant placed it into her palm. She clamped, released her grip, and leaned back for a breath. Her eyes flicked to the monitor, then to the anesthesiologist, then down toward the draped field near the general's neck. The tracheostomy site sat just above the sterile drapes. The incision was small and clean, placed slightly lower than usual angled, so the tube lay flat against the skin instead of jutting out. There was hardly any bruising. "Who did his airway?" Park asked. "One of the ER nurses," the anesthesiologist answered. "West. Riley West." Park studied the cut for another heartbeat. "That is not a civilian technique," she murmured. Her assistant glanced up. "You recognize it?" "I have seen it in training modules from Kandahar footage," Park said. "Low-profile cut, minimal exposure, fast. It keeps the tube out of the way when you have to work on the chest and abdomen, in a helicopter in the dark under fire." She did not say anything more. There was no time. She turned back to the open abdomen. "All right," she said. "Let us keep the miracle you were handed." Downstairs, the automatic doors at the ambulance bay slid open once more. This time there was no stretcher, no shouting. 3 figures in dark green flight suits walked through in a straight line that opened a path through the crowd without anyone touching them. They moved like people who understood how to use space. The one in front was in his early 30s, with a close-cropped haircut and a calm, alert expression. A small patch on his sleeve marked him as a petty officer, first class. A subdued trident glinted near his shoulder. His eyes found Riley within seconds. She was standing just inside the doors, one hand still on the strap of her bag, as if she had considered leaving and changed her mind. The security guard hovered behind her, clearly uncertain whether he should be holding her back or stepping away. "Riley West," the petty officer said. He stopped a precise distance in front of her. Up close, she could see the salt lines on his boots, the scuffs on his knee pads, the small nicks in his hands. Working hands. She straightened slightly without thinking. "Yes," she said. He lifted his hand in a crisp salute. It was not casual, it was deliberate, formal, and deep. "Chief Petty Officer West, ma'am," he said. "Petty Officer First Class Mason Ortiz Fleet Medical Support. I have orders for your immediate extraction to Pacific Fleet Medical Command." The words hung in the air for a moment, strange against the familiar background of monitor beeps and overhead pages. Joe was the first to react. Her mouth opened in a small "oh." "Chief," she repeated, barely audible. Behind them, someone dropped a clipboard. It hit the floor with a snap. Riley felt the eyes on her, hundreds of tiny weights pressing into her back and shoulders. "You have the wrong person," she started. Ortiz shook his head once. "No, ma'am," he said. "We have the right one. Chief Petty Officer Riley Ann West. United States Navy, HMC, formerly assigned to 3rd Marine Logistics Group. Current status reactivated under emergency directive." He held out a folded document sealed in plastic. Before Riley could reach for it, another voice cut in. "This is not happening." Dr. Klein stood near the nurse's station tie, slightly loose now, as if he had rushed out. His expression had gone from pale to an unhealthy flush. "She is a civilian employee of this hospital," he said. His words came faster than usual. "She has been terminated. She is no longer authorized to practice here. You cannot simply walk in and take her." Ortiz turned his head just enough to look at him. His face stayed neutral, but something in his eyes cooled. "Sir, your authority over Chief West ended when you placed a barrier between her and a critical patient," he said. The moment you obstructed a life-saving intervention on a senior officer, you stepped into our lane." "I did no such thing," Klein snapped. "She violated protocol. I enforced policy." Ortiz did not raise his voice. "A major general is alive because Chief West acted when your protocol froze your staff, Isaiah. Command concurs. Her status has been reactivated. She's now under Navy jurisdiction." He nodded toward the hallway. "Additionally, sir, the Judge Advocate General's office has been notified regarding the circumstances of this morning. They will want to speak with you." The mention of JAG landed like a physical blow. Klein's mouth opened, then closed. His gaze flicked to the cluster of staff to the security camera above the doorway back to Riley. "You cannot just take my nurse," he said. The word might came out too loud. Riley felt a small, surprising sting at that word. Not for the ownership in it, but for the timing. Ortiz glanced at her, then back at Klein. "She is not your nurse," he said. "She is our chief." He turned to Riley again, the edge of formality softening by a fraction. "Ma'am, your transport is on the roof," he said. "General Stroud has been stabilized for now. Pacific Fleet Command is requesting your presence." The ring on the chain under her scrub top felt heavier. She could feel the imprint of it against her skin. She did not look at Klein. She looked at Joe. Joe's eyes shone, but she stood straight. "You go," Joe said. Her voice was rough. "We will try not to break anything down here." Riley gave a small nod. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. "I need my notebook," she said to Ortiz. "Of course," he answered. "We will walk with you." They moved as a group, Ortiz at her side, the other two sailors flanking behind through the ER that had been her whole world for half a year. Nurses stepped aside. Patients watched with wide eyes. A teenager on a gurney lifted her phone, then lowered it again when she caught Riley's gaze. In the locker room, Riley opened the metal door one more time. The sweatshirt and shoes stayed. She took only the small leather notebook and tucked it under her arm. On their way to the elevator, the overhead speakers crackled. "Attention," a voice announced. "All staff be advised there is a military aircraft on the roof. Please stay clear of access stairwells until further notice." The elevator ride to the top was brief. The doors opened onto a concrete stairwell, then another door that led to the roof. The noise hit her first. Rotors at full idle, a deep drum in her chest. The wind tore at her scrubs and hair. The helicopter sat crouched on the marked pad door's open, crew chief waving them forward. Ortiz leaned close to her ear so she could hear. "Watch your head," he said. "Stay low, step where I step." They ran the short distance in a half-crouch. The world narrowed to the slap of their boots on the paint lines, the sting of grit in her eyes, the taste of exhaust. Inside the cabin, she strapped into a web seat along the side. Ortiz took the seat across from her, clipping in with practiced hands. The crew chief slid the door shut. The outside noise dulled to a muted roar. For a moment there was nothing to do but feel the vibration through the metal and listen to the radio chatter in the headsets. Ortiz passed her an extra set. She slipped them on. The voice of the pilot came through clear and calm. "Fleet Medical, this is Eagle 6 lifting from Summit Ridge with one priority passenger." Riley stared at the floor at the scuff marks where other boots had rested. Ortiz studied her. "First time back in a bird since you left?" he asked. "Second," she said. He smiled just a little. "They told us not to call you by your call sign," he said you did not like it. "I do not," she replied. He nodded, then ignored that instruction. "Whisper Doc," he said quietly. "That was you, right?" Her jaw tightened. "It was a radio joke," she said. "It got out of hand." "I read the after-action reports," Ortiz said. "Jokes do not keep 19 Marines alive in the dark for 3 days." She looked up, eyes meeting his over the trembling air between them. "Reports leave things out," she said. He did not push further. The helicopter banked. Through the small porthole window she could see the city sliding by under them, the grid of streets, the strip of beach, the ships anchored just offshore. They crossed water. The base on Coronado spun into view. Rows of low buildings, hangars, and antennas rose from the sand. A larger complex sat near the shore flags snapping in the wind. The helicopter dipped and came to rest on a smaller pad beside that complex. Engines wound down. The crew chief slid the door open again, letting in light and a blast of cooler air. When Riley stepped out, the reception was nothing like the quiet exit from Summit Ridge. A line of officers and senior enlisted waited at the edge of the pad. They stood at attention as she approached, saluting in sequence. Navy blue service khakis, a Marine in dress uniform with ribbons stacked high on his chest. At the center of the line stood a tall man in a khaki uniform with silver eagles on his collar. His hair was going gray at the temples. His eyes were clear and assessing. "Chief West," he said, returning her salute with one of his own. "I am Captain Avery Monroe, Pacific Fleet Medical Commander." "Sir," she said. Monroe held her gaze. "You stabilized Major General Stroud this morning," he said. "For the record, this is the second time you have done that." The breeze caught the edge of his words and hung them in the air for a moment. Riley felt the helicopter's leftover vibration still humming in her bones. The memory of another crash layered over the first. Firelight instead of fluorescent. Dust instead of disinfectant. Does he remember, she asked. Monroe's expression softened a fraction. His first words when he could form a sentence were to find you, he said. He did not give us a lot, but he was very clear about that part. He gestured toward the building. Walk with me, he said. If opposite, he said. They passed through glass doors into a cool hallway. The walls here did not have motivational posters or framed awards. Screens lined one side, instead, each showing maps, numbers, and live feeds of distant places. People in uniforms moved with purpose, but there was no panic. Monroe stopped at a doorway that opened into a larger room full of consoles and displays. A central screen showed a cluster of red icons over a mountain range. Chief, he said, nodding toward the data. We have an active situation. They wanted a surgeon. Stroud overruled them. He looked at her, the weight of the decision resting plainly between them. He asked for you? Monroe stepped aside so she could see the main screen. The mountain range on it was jagged and gray topographic lines stacked like ribs. Red markers pulsed over a narrow valley. Numbers flickered in small boxes beside them. Recon element from Task Force Echo 7, Monroe said. They walked into something they did not see. Comms are patchy. Dust elevation, bad weather. Their forward corpsman was killed in the first hit. The rest are improvising. A watch officer at a nearby console glanced over. We are getting vitals over a piggyback line from their squad leader's wrist unit, he said. He is trying to relay for multiple casualties. It is a mess. Riley stepped closer. On the monitor, a grid displayed heart rates and oxygen saturations for 6 different call signs. Some readings were live jumping. Others were frozen, the numbers flatlined or stuck on the last data point before signal loss. Bring up their last 3 minutes, she said. The watch officer tapped his keyboard. The numbers rewound, then played back at normal speed. Tiny graphs traced arcs that rose and fell. Which channel is their squad leader? She asked. Call sign Echo 7 Actual, he said. Sergeant Lucas Trent. Can you patch me through? She asked. Monroe nodded. You are on net once they answer. Yeah? Once they answer. The watch officer handed her a headset. She slipped it over her ears, adjusted the mic, and listened. The line was full of static like wind ripping through dry grass. Echo 7 Actual, this is Pacific Fleet Medical Command, a comms tech called. Radio check. There was a crackle, then a voice cut through. Male, mid-20s, worn thin with adrenaline. Pacific Medical, this is Echo 7, he said. We are pinned in a ravine. We have multiple wounded. Our corpsman is down. We are using his kit best we can, but we are losing them. Sergeant Trent, this is Chief West, Riley said. Her tone was quiet level. I need you to slow your words down. Tell me how many can still talk to you. There was a pause, rustling, someone groaning in the background. 4 conscious, 2 out, he said, plus Delaney. He is the corpsman. He is gone. The way he said gone left no doubt. Riley glanced at the vitals grid again. Your call sign is Echo 7 Actual, she said. Read out the last 4 digits of the monitor labels you see on each of your wounded. He hesitated, then did as told. 0231, 0233, 0234 Goga, he recited. The unconscious ones are 0235 and 0236. On the screen in front of Riley, the numbers lined up. 0231 had a heart rate of 130 and a dropping blood pressure. 0233 was tachycardic with saturations in the high 80s. 0234 showed spikes of pain, then sudden dips. Pull your handset as close to each chest as you can while they are breathing, she said, one at a time. I want to hear them breathe. He did it. The room in San Diego listened to the sound of lungs half a world away. Some breaths rattled, some were shallow. One was wet and bubbling. She closed her eyes briefly, building a picture. They are under resuscitated, she said to Monroe and the watch officer, her hand covering the mic. They are treating them like clean rifle wounds. These are not clean. She pointed at the blood pressure trend for 0231. High heart rate, dropping pressure, okay. Saturation for now, she said. He is bleeding into a cavity. They are pouring crystalloids into him so the numbers look decent until they crash. Sergeant Trent, she said into the headset. What kind of fire hit you? Big stuff, he replied. Sounded like God slamming doors. It chewed through the ridge above us, took Delaney's head off. We cannot see where it is coming from. Look at your wounded, she said. Entry wounds, small exit wounds, big and ugly with lots of torn tissue. Yeah, he said slowly, like someone set off a grenade inside them. Her eyes stayed on the graphs. That is heavy machine gun fire, she said to Monroe. Probably 12.7 millimeter old Soviet design high elevation. They are getting hydrostatic shock and deep internal damage that does not match what they can see on the outside. A young man in a lieutenant's rank at the intel station looked over sharply. How do you know that from breaths and a few numbers? He asked. Riley did not look away from the screen. I have watched enough people bleed from them from the dirt side, she said. She shifted the mic again. Sergeant Trent, this is what you are going to do, she said. You are going to stop chasing normal blood pressures. If you have whole blood or packed red cells, that is what you hang. If not, use what Delaney left labeled as most urgent. You keep their mental status and radial pulses as your guide, not the cuff. There was a soft cough of disbelief from someone at a nearby console. She ignored it. And Sergeant, she added, you will stop letting them lie flat. Anyone who can sit up against a rock with their legs slightly bent, you prop them like that. You keep their lungs as open as you can in that terrain. Copy, he said, his voice steadied. What about the 2 out cold? She checked the frozen vitals again. 0235, she said. That one is not coming back. You know that already. Silence crackled for a long second. I do, he said. His voice dropped. I just did not want to say it. You already said it when you gave me his numbers, she replied. Cover his face, secure his tags. Go to 0236. He still has a chance. On the central map, one of the red icons flickered, then changed color as their system updated the casualty status based on her directives. The intel lieutenant leaned back, eyes narrowed in thought. She is triaging a firefight from 100 miles away, he muttered. Try thousands, Monroe said quietly. Chief, what about the weapon position? She nodded toward the valley display. They are being hit from above and at a shallow angle, she said. Elevation is steep, likely a ridge to their east or northeast. The delay between impacts and sound, from their description, tells you the range. They will not spot the muzzle flash if they keep their eyes on the ridgeline. She tapped the map where contour lines crowded close. They need to look lower near the shadow line, she said. Depressed Mount Old Rock cut something that gives cover and sustained line of fire. The intel lieutenant was already typing. I will get this to their overwatch, he said. We might be able to get a drone on it. By the wall, a woman in a navy uniform with oak leaves on her collar had been listening quietly. She stepped closer to Monroe. Captain, with respect, she said, who exactly did you drag out of Summit Ridge this morning? This is Chief Petty Officer Riley West, Monroe said. Call sign Whisper Doc. The lieutenant's head snapped up. Whisper Doc is not a story, he said. She is real. The woman with oak leaves opened a file on her tablet. A photo looked back at them younger, but still unmistakably Riley. Mud on her face, a helmet pushed back, eyes sharp and alert. Marines crowded around her in the frame, some on stretchers, all upright. Afghanistan, Kunar Province, the woman read. CH-47 downed near a remote village. 19 Marines on board, single surviving corpsman. 72 hours without air support, 19 Marines recovered alive. She glanced at Riley. That was you, she said. It was not a question. Riley did not answer. Her thumb found the ring under her shirt and held it. On the screen, one of the vitals shifted. 0236's heart rate slowed, blood pressure edging into a less catastrophic range. The small movement was enough. Sergeant Trent, she said, you are buying him time. Good work. Copy that, he said. The pride in his voice bled through the static. Feels like Delaney is still here. Delaney is there in everything you are using, she said. Keep working his playbook. Monroe watched the exchange, then turned his head at the sound of the door opening behind them. 2 military police in dress uniforms entered, flanking a man in a white coat. The coat was out of place among the khaki and blue. The man inside it looked smaller than he had in his own office that morning. Dr. Harold Klein's eyes darted around the command center, trying to find something familiar. There was nothing. No framed certificates, no neat plants, no soft chairs. Only screens, data, and people whose attention stayed on the work in front of them. Captain Monroe, one of the MPs said, as requested. Klein's gaze snagged on Riley. She stood by the central console headset on giving quiet instructions that echoed into a valley full of wounded men. There was dried blood on her arm that he recognized. His own office lights had caught the same smear earlier. He looked away quickly. Dr. Klein, Monroe said. His tone was polite without warmth. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I do not understand why I'm here, Klein said. His voice had a brittle edge. I have patients, a hospital to run. You have a situation to answer for, the woman with the oak leaves said. Commander Julia Hayes, Judge, Advocate, General's Corps. She offered a clipped nod. This morning you terminated Chief West's employment immediately after she performed a life-saving procedure on Major General Stroud, Hayes said. You then misrepresented her actions as insubordination when contacted by our liaison. I enforced hospital policy, Klein said. She acted outside her scope. I did what any responsible administrator would do. His voice rose on the last words. Heads turned, then turned away again as people reset their focus on the screens. Monroe gestured toward the monitors. "While you are here, doctor," he said, "take a look." On one screen, Stroud's post-operative vitals glowed steady and soft green. On another, the Echo 7 grid flickered as numbers slowly stabilized. The map of the valley displayed new icons showing air assets moving into position. Chief West's actions this morning did more than keep a general breathing, Monroe said. They preserved a mine the Corps relies on. Right now, she's doing for an entire squad what she did for him, from here. Klein stared. The scale of the room seemed to press down on him. "I warned you about her," he said weakly. "About what happens when people like her make their own decisions." "People like her," Hayes repeated. She took a step closer. "Define that for me." He floundered. "Impulsive, he said. Uncontrolled, dangerous to institutional stability. She patched a critical oxygen line with some kind of field compound. She broke procedure in ways you cannot see from up here. She is a risk." Hayes's expression did not change. "We reviewed that incident," she said. "Facilities confirmed the line would have failed within 24 hours. She prevented a mass casualty event in your own building. You responded by issuing her a reprimand." Klein's mouth opened and shut. His gaze darted to Riley again. She was listening to Sergeant Trent describe the terrain, asking short, targeted questions. There was no emotion in her tone, only focus. "Doctor," Monroe said, "you have spent your career curating a very controlled environment. Today, that environment intersected with a much larger system. In that system, Chief West is not a problem to be managed. She is a critical asset." He let the word hang there. "Effective immediately, your contract with Summit Ridge is under review," Hayes added. "Your decisions leading up to and following this incident will be examined. Your medical license and your eligibility for federal funding are part of that discussion." Klein swallowed. The words landed in him like stones in water, sinking faster than he could process them. "This is outrageous," he said. "You cannot punish me for trying to protect my hospital." "We are not here to punish," Hayes said. "We are here to understand how a director of an emergency department became more afraid of deviation than he was of losing lives." He took a step back, bumping into one of the MPs. The contact steadied him physically, but did nothing for his balance. "I did not want the hospital to be blamed," he said. "If he died on our table, if she cut him and failed everything we built, there would have collapsed." Riley's voice cut through from the headset slightly louder. "Sergeant Trent, listen to me," she said. "You are going to touch each of your wounded on the shoulder and say their names one by one. You are going to tell them there is a bird coming for them. You do not say maybe. You say it like it is already landing." Klein looked at her again. The words were simple. The effect was not. He could hear the murmur of the sergeant repeating names into the net, holding on to something steady that had not been there minutes ago. Monroe watched Klein's face. "That is what she does when left to her own judgment," Monroe said. "She keeps people alive long enough for the rest of us to catch up." The MPs shifted their weight. Hayes closed her tablet. "We are finished here for now," she said to Klein. "You will remain available for further questions." They guided him toward the door. As he passed Riley, he slowed, almost as if he were about to speak. She did not look at him. Her attention stayed on the flickering numbers and the rough, strained breathing of a man in a ravine far from San Diego. "Echo 7, she said softly into the mic. "You are not out of this yet, but you are moving." Klein stood for half a second longer, watching the set of her shoulders, the calm control in her voice. The realization of who he had tried to push out of his small kingdom slid across his features. The MP at his elbow cleared his throat. Klein turned away. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. The command center absorbed the sound and went on working. The valley on the screen grew less frantic. Heart rates that had been racing dipped toward steadier rhythms. Blood pressures lifted just enough to pull the numbers out of the red. New markers appeared along the map where medevac birds checked in, moving toward the narrow slice of terrain holding Echo 7. "First bird is inbound," the watch officer said. 7 minutes to dust off. In Riley's headset, Sergeant Trent's voice sounded older than it had when he first answered. "Hear that, boys?" he called out, not bothering to move away from the mic. "Bird on the way. Nobody gets to quit now." There were low replies, half curses, half breathless humor. Someone laughed, then coughed, then laughed again. Riley watched the vitals. One of the lines that had been frozen since the beginning stayed flat. She let her eyes rest on it for a beat, giving that absence a small private acknowledgement. "Sergeant," she said, "stay on your feet until the last one is loaded." "That was the plan," he answered. "You sticking around." "I will be on this channel until they lift," she said. He accepted that without question. There was no drama in it, just work. When the first helicopter reached their position, the system marked the contact. The room in San Diego listened to the clipped commands, the roar of rotors, the grunt of men lifting stretchers over rock. "First two are up," Trent reported. "One breathing on his own, one hanging on to your idea of a pulse." Riley traced their vitals as the distance readings updated. As the second and third birds took their turns, she shifted her attention from the numbers to the squad leader himself. "Sergeant," she said, "hand your handset to whoever will be in charge of collecting your dead." There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. "What makes you think that is not me?" he asked. "Because you followed orders from someone who is not in your chain of command for the past 30 minutes without arguing," she said. "That tells me you still have work to do for the living." The quiet that followed held a different kind of weight. "Delaney would have liked you," he said. "Delaney taught you well," she replied. "He can like me later." By the time the last of Echo 7's wounded were airborne, the buzz of the command center had eased. People stepped away from consoles long enough to stretch their shoulders. Someone handed Riley a bottle of water she did not remember asking for. "Echo 7 Actual," she said. "You are clear to shut this line down. You did what you were supposed to do." "Copy, Chief," Trent said. The static was less now, as if the storm over them had moved on. "When they told us the Navy was sending some kind of ghost medic, I thought they were screwing with us." "I am not a ghost," she said. "Could have fooled me," he replied. "Echo 7 out." The line went dead. Riley pulled off her headset. The world in the command center rushed in around her, a tide of muted voices and the soft chiming of systems resetting. Monroe stepped closer. "Nice work," he said. "They will not all make it, but a lot more will than this morning." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Stroud?" she asked. "Out of surgery stable, he said. "They will keep him in ICU for a while. He's very hard to kill." She leaned against the edge of the console, feeling the edge press into her palms. "You pulled me out of a job today," she said. "I would like to make sure I have one before you decide what to do with me." Monroe almost smiled. "Your place here is not the question," he said. "The paperwork has to catch up, that is all." He glanced toward Commander Hayes, who was finishing a quiet conversation with the intel lieutenant. "In the meantime," he added, "you have loose ends at Summit Ridge." The idea of walking back into the hospital so soon made something in her chest tighten. She pictured the hall, the smell of disinfectant, the faces that had watched her leave. "I have a locker and some notes," she said. "You have more than that," Monroe replied. "Our liaison has been talking to their board since you left the building. They would like to speak with you formally and informally." He nodded toward the door. "We will drive," he said. "No more helicopters for the next hour." The ride back to Summit Ridge was quiet. The car cut through late afternoon traffic tires humming over asphalt. San Diego's skyline sat in the distance, familiar and distant at the same time. Riley watched the city slide by through the window. Her reflection stared back, a thin line of dried blood still staining the cuff of her scrub sleeve. She did not wipe it away. When they pulled into the hospital entrance, the scene was not what she had left. The automatic doors opened onto a lobby that had gone still. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phone calls paused. People stepped aside almost unconsciously, forming a loose path toward the ER. Monroe fell in a step behind her, choosing not to overshadow her presence. As she turned the corner into the emergency department, the quiet became structured. Doctors, nurses, techs, clerks, even the housekeeping staff stood along the hallway walls. No one spoke. No one pretended to look busy. Faces held a mix of shame, respect, curiosity, and something that looked very close to relief. Jo Carter waited at the front of the line, hands gripping a frame pressed to her chest. Her sunflower scrub cap was slightly askew, as if she had pulled it on in a hurry. Riley stopped a few feet from her. Jo's voice, when it came, was softer than Riley had ever heard it. "My nephew," Jo said. She lifted the frame enough for Riley to see. It held a photograph of a young man in marine dress blues, grinning wide hat tucked under one arm. "He joined the Corps last year. You cleared him in triage when he passed out during a drill. I made a joke about you cracking his ribs if he ever dropped in front of you." Riley remembered the kid, pale from heat and nerves, embarrassed about the faint. "You brought him back up without embarrassing him," Jo said. "I thought you were intense. Over the top. Too much." She swallowed. "I was wrong." Riley set her bag down for a moment and reached out, resting a hand on Jo's shoulder. The contact was firm grounding. "You were protective," Riley said. "That is not the worst thing a charge nurse can be." "I was blind," Jo answered. "We all were." Riley shook her head once. "The only apology that matters is how you work from now on," she said. "You take what you saw today, and next time something feels wrong, you do not wait for a form." Jo nodded, eyes glassy. "I will," she said. A movement at the edge of the crowd pulled Riley's attention. Dr. Ethan Morales stepped forward, a trauma manual tucked under his arm, the spine cracked and frayed. The usual quick arrogance in his face had been replaced with something more careful. Chief West, he said. said. The title felt different in his mouth, not like a label, more like a rank he finally understood. Ethan, she replied. I watched you that morning, he said, when you cut for the airway. He grimaced at his own phrasing. When you saved Stroud. She did not correct him. I thought I was ready for anything, Yibal, he went on. Top of my class, all the procedures down cold. Then I tried to intubate him, and I realized I was more afraid of being yelled at than of him dying. He looked down at the manual, then back up. I would like to change that, he said. I want to learn, really learn. Not just the steps, the thinking, the part you do when everything else is falling apart. Riley studied him for a moment. The room behind him seemed to lean in, waiting. Why? Yes, she asked. He blinked, surprised by the question. Because... He started, then stopped. He took a breath. Because men like my father end up on tables like these after deployments. I have treated enough of them to know the difference between someone who reads about hemorrhagic shock and someone who has watched it happen in the dirt. He held her gaze without flinching. I do not want to be the first one, he said. Not anymore. That at least was honest. I am not a residency program, but Riley said. I'm not here to make you feel better about yourself. I'm not asking you to, he replied. I'm asking you to make me useful. A small line eased at the corner of her mouth. Training starts at 0500, she said. If Captain Monroe signs off on you coming to Coronado, you bring running shoes and no ego. You show up late once you are out. He nodded. The corner of his mouth twitched, relief and dread mixing into something almost like gratitude. Yes, Chief, he said. He said. Across the hall, maintenance workers were busy near an empty stretch of wall by the triage station. One stood on a small ladder drilling anchors into the plaster. Another held a wrapped rectangle. Riley watched as they unwrapped a brass plaque. The etched letters caught the fluorescent light. Never mistake quiet for small in honor of Chief Riley West, whisper Doc. She could feel the flush rise under her skin. I did not approve that, she said. Joe sniffed. Good thing we did not ask, Joe replied. This is for us as much as it is for you. A young nurse at the edge of the crowd leaned toward her neighbor. Who is Whisper Doc? She whispered. Her neighbor, one of the older techs, answered without taking his eyes off Riley. The reason we are all rethinking what competent looks like, he said. Riley picked up her bag again. The leather notebook sat on top its edges, worn from years of being thumbed through in bad light. I'm not staying on your staffing sheet, she said to Joe. You know that. Joe nodded. We know, she said, but your name is staying on that wall. Monroe checked his watch, then caught Riley's eye. We need to get back, he said quietly. She took one last look down the length of the hallway at the faces lined up there. For 6 months, this had been the extent of her world by choice. Now it was a single corridor in a larger map. Take care of each other, she said. It was not loud, but everyone heard it. She walked toward the exit. As she reached the door, someone had propped them open. The outside light spilled in golden and clean. Far above the building, just audible over the city noise, she could hear the steady, distant hum of rotors beginning to build again. The second time that day, Riley walked through the doors of Pacific Fleet Medical Command. The building felt less like a foreign country and more like a place she had once known and forgotten. The sun was starting to drop toward the water. Light spilled through the high windows in long stripes laying gold across the polished floors and the blue of the uniforms moving over them. Monroe led her down a different corridor, this time away from the command center and toward a quieter wing. The rooms here held conference tables, whiteboards, and racks of training equipment instead of screens full of live feeds. He stopped at an open door. Inside, a makeshift classroom had been set up. Mannequins lay on stretchers with fake blood drying on their plastic skin. Tourniquets, chest seals, and airway kits were spread across tables. A projector cast a paused slide on the wall that read, Tactical Combat Casualty Care in block letters. 3 corpsmen in desert boots and green shirts snapped to attention when they saw Monroe. Their eyes flicked to Riley and did not quite hide their curiosity. At ease, Monroe said. He nodded toward them. Next crop of fleet medics. They start advanced TCCC next week. Riley stepped in the smell of rubber and disinfectant wrapping around her again. You put your curriculum together yet? Monroe asked. She looked at the slide, then at the mannequins. Not on paper, she said. You have it where it counts, he replied. He reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was thick, the seal formal. This is the part where I hand you something and say a few words, he said. You can open it now or later. She took it, feeling the weight of it in her hand before she slid it with a thumb. Inside was a crisp document with her name at the top. Fleet Master Chief Hospital, Corpsman Riley, a West Senior Medical Advisor, Pacific Fleet. Below the title lines of text laid out duties and authorities. Her eyes skimmed past the paragraphs to the bottom where Monroe's signature sat, beside the Admiral's. "That is a lot of ink for a girl who could not keep a hospital job this morning," she said. Monroe's mouth tugged upward. "Summit Ridge is rethinking that opinion," he said. "Their board chair has already called twice to apologize for lending Dr. Klein a door to slam." The name did not land as hard as it had a few hours ago. It felt distant. "What happens to him?" she asked. "Commander Hayes will have more precise words later," Monroe said. "Short version, his contract is done. His license will not touch anything that takes federal money again." Riley turned the paper over in her hands. The title meant planes and ships and units with names she had not memorized yet. It also meant there would be no quiet ER corner for a long time. "Is there a choice?" she asked. Monroe did not pretend not to understand. "Yes," he said. "There is always a choice. You could walk right back out that door and find another civilian job that would be glad to have you. No one here will stop you." Her fingers closed around the ring under her shirt. The metal warmed slowly against her skin. "When I left the first time," she said, "I thought if I made my world small enough, the noise would stay outside." "Did it?" he asked. She thought of Summit Ridge's white lights, the way the crack in the oxygen line had hissed in the silence. No one else heard the morning she had cut open a general's throat on a bed, meant for car crashes and sprained ankles. "No," she said. He nodded as if he had expected that. "Then maybe your world is supposed to be this size, guys," he said. "Big enough to make all the noise worth listening to." One of the coursemen in the classroom shifted the movement, drawing Riley's eyes. He could not have been more than 22. His forearms were tanned where the sleeves ended, his hands calloused. He watched her with a look somewhere between intimidation and hope. "Chief," he blurted. "Ma'am, is it true you—" He hesitated, searching for a way to phrase it that did not sound like a legend. "That thing with the 19 Marines, is that real?" Riley held his gaze for a moment, then glanced at the mannequin nearest him. Its chest was marked with circles from Sharpies where students had practiced needle decompressions. "Real enough," she said. He swallowed. "How did you not snap?" he asked. The question sounded like one he had been carrying long before he saw her. "With all that on you." She thought about the cave in Kunar, the smell of blood and cordite, the way time had stretched around each decision. "I did not think about all of it at once," she said. "I thought about the one person in front of me, then the next one, then the next. The weight only crushes you if you try to lift it all in one motion." His shoulders dropped slightly as if that answer released a breath he forgot he was holding. Monroe stepped back toward the door. "I will leave you to it, Chikwe," he said. "You have introductions to make." When he was gone, the room felt smaller but more focused. Riley set her bag on a chair and moved to the front of the class. She did not stand behind the lectern. She hooked a thumb into her pocket and looked at the three young faces. "Names," she said. They introduced themselves. Rivera, Chan, O'Neill, each added an HM2, HM3 after the last name reflexive. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow we start tearing apart the manual and putting it back together. Tonight I want you to think about every call you have answered where you felt your hands moving and your brain dragging behind. Those are the ones we are going to talk about." Rivera frowned. "My last instructor told us not to dwell on," he said. "Said it messed with our heads." "It will," she replied, "if you do it alone." She picked up a training airway blade from the table and rolled it between her fingers. "What you are carrying is not just protocols," she said. "You know, woman, she was salad. It is every time someone taught you something in the field. Some of those someones are not here anymore. You owe it to them not to treat their work like a checklist." O'Neill glanced at the patch on her shoulder. "Ma'am, yet," he said. "Can I ask a stupid question?" "You can ask a question," she said. "We will see if it's stupid." He nodded toward the insignia on her collar and sleeve. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Finally wearing the rank to match what everyone says you did." She looked down as if only now remembering the new stitching on her uniform. "Rank is what they put on your shirt so other people know where to point in a crisis," she said. "Responsibility is what you feel when you look at your own hands after it is over." She set the airway blade down. "If you chase rank, you will always be looking over your shoulder," she said. "If you chase responsibility, you look at the person in front of you. That keeps you steadier." The room was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. "That is enough philosophy for us," she added. "Tomorrow morning, 0600. We start with airway under noise, sleep while you can." As they filed out, each gave her a small nod. Some looked more nervous than others. All of them walked a little straighter. When the last one was gone, she picked up her leather notebook and flipped it open. Pages filled with diagrams, scribbled notes, and names looked back at her. Some notes were written in cramped handwriting from years before, some fresher. The ring on the chain brushed the paper. She let it lie there for a second, then closed the book. Commander Hayes appeared in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "I did not want to interrupt," Hayes said. "You heard enough," Riley replied. "Enough to use parts of that in my next ethics lecture," Hayes said. She stepped into the room. "Everything is confirmed on Klein. He will not be in charge of anyone's oxygen levels again." Riley nodded. There was no triumph in the line of her mouth, only acceptance. "Summit Ridge requested a liaison from us for a while," Hayes added. "They want help rewriting some of their emergency policies. You made an impression." "Good," Riley said. "They have good people. They just needed the edges sanded the other way." Hayes gave a faint smile. "One more thing," she said. "Stroud is awake. He is asking to see you when you have a minute that is not full of saving an entire theater." The thought of stepping into an ICU room, of seeing him without blood or shrapnel, settled strangely in Riley's chest. "I will go by," she said. Hayes nodded and left her with that. The ICU was dim and still, machines blinking green and amber in low light. Outside Stroud's room, a Marine in a dress uniform stood guard. He moved aside when he saw her eyes, respectful. Inside Stroud lay propped slightly up lines and tubes running from his arms and chest. The shaved patch on his scalp framed a fading bruise. His eyes were open clear despite the bruising. He saw her in the doorway and lifted his hand an inch off the blanket. It was not much, but the motion was precise, a small private salute with 2 fingers. "Chief," he said. His voice was rough but steady. She stepped closer to the bed. "Sir," she answered. "Did not think I would get to thank you twice," he said. "You have a habit of fishing me out of bad landings." "You have a habit of landing in bad places," she said. The corner of his mouth twitched. "They tell me you are taking on the fleet slot," he said. "I argued they should have given you that 5 years ago." "I was not ready 5 years ago," she said. "You were," he replied. "You just did not want to be." He studied her for a moment. "Doing it anyway, ye said. Even when you do not want to, that is the job." She did not disagree. He let his hand fall back to the blanket. "You saved my life twice," he said. "But I am more interested in the ones you will not let them lose, because you are training the next round of stubborn medics." "They will not be stubborn," she said. "They will be prepared." "That too," he said. She stayed a little longer, talking about nothing important. The weather, the food, the way the ICU machines sounded different from the ones downrange. When she left, his breathing was slow and even. Night settled fully over San Diego by the time she stepped outside. The air was cooler, carrying the mingled scents of ocean and jet fuel. In the distance, lights from ships and boats dotted the black water. A helicopter sat on the far pad engines, silent for now, rotors still as if resting. Its outline was a familiar shape against the sky. Not a threat, not a rescue. Just a tool waiting for a reason to move again. She walked to the edge of the parking lot and looked out toward the city. Somewhere across the water, Summit Ridge's windows glowed. In the ER, there a new intern stood in the mechanical corridor near the oxygen manifold. The space was the same Riley had stepped into that morning, pipes and gauges, and the soft hum of hidden systems. The intern held a flashlight beam tracing the lines with more attention than most. Joe stood in the doorway, arms folded. "Find anything?" Joe asked. "Not yet," the intern said, "but I am listening." "Good," Joe said. "Imagine if you miss it, the whole floor could stop breathing. That should keep your ears sharp." Back on the base, a breeze tugged at Riley's hair. She reached up, fingers settling once more on the ring beneath her shirt. The world felt no quieter than it had when the day started. The difference was where she was standing when it made its noise. On the pad behind her, ground crew began to move around the waiting helicopter, checking panels, testing lights. The distant thud of rotor blades starting to turn rolled across the tarmac, low and steady. Riley turned toward the sound and started walking. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.